We were planning on doing our last video in the Watchman Guide podcast series this week, covering the millennium, the Great White Throne Judgment, and eternity. And we still will, but what we're about to cover this week in a quick two-part series is too important to wait on. And I want to give a special thanks to a dear friend of the ministry named Crystal who had been talking with us about some of these topics. She has sent us some very good information on them, because speaking for myself, a couple of these topics we're about to cover I had seen in the news, but I was a little too preoccupied with recent site changes, so it didn't strike me as to what I was truly seeing with them. And in the next episode in this series, we'll be covering information that will deal with AI and quantum computing and what's going on there. And I also want to thank BC Rebel, who has posted some very good information to one of our videos about this. So what is so important? Well, there are a number of things. I think we are closer to the rapture than any of us are truly thinking. I believe we are at the point that we are counting our time in days, weeks, and possibly months. Now, of course, we do not know, and I'm not about to say it will be this time or that time, but I will say, now is the time to focus on Jesus. If you're going about your daily life and looking for something that might indicate it's time to put my relationship with Jesus as my number one priority, well, here it is. Not that you shouldn't have been all along, but to say that there is no indication that the rapture is at hand is simply false. As we have been saying for some time now, and have shown, the Antichrist is on the scene and he is calling the shots from behind the curtain at the World Economic Forum. We do not know who he is right now because it's not time for us to know. He will not be revealed until after the rapture, and that is when he will step out from behind the shadows. And if you recall from some of our very first podcasts, specifically episodes 2 and 6, we point out that there was a shift in the World Economic Forum's plan. They had come out with Agenda 2030, and then also in addition to that, they came out with Our Common Agenda, with a stated goal of a global government by 2025. The reason for this is because their plans got shifted by God's mercy. All of what we are about to cover was supposed to have already happened, but God has given grace and mercy to all of those who have been saved from 2016 up until these last few days and weeks right before the rapture. This clip I'm about to show you is from a former executive director of the United Nations and a former president of the Club of Rome. In this video, he is stating that their plans were supposed to have already been completed by now, but were delayed because of the Trump presidency. And keep in mind, this isn't about Trump. It's about God bringing about a situation to delay their plans.
The problem is that the UN agenda is the same with Davos agenda. Mm-hmm. This, in fact, is my main topic for our conversation today. For this reason, the world oligarchic system, they have the power on Europe because they control all the people like Bundeskanzler or president or prime minister or whatever there are. So for this reason, sorry to interrupt you, the situation with Donald Trump was a big shock.
They didn't expect that to happen. That was an accident, I suppose.
Absolutely an accident.
Not part of their game plan.
It was the first time of the oligarch system was happened an accident. Mm-hmm. Because normally it have to be Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Not Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And the process which we are dealing now with this pandemic and all these liars was supposed to be in 2016.
They were pushed into
exactly, in a sense, to be in 2020, to be a disaster regarding food and water.
Ah, I see.
Which normally they want to arrive in 2025 now.
I see.
So the plan was a little bit changed. And for this reason, of course, there are the last moments, and we have to have the courage now, all of us, to say no. In a sense that UN could be a fantastic, can have the fantastic role, but is not, because it's totally under control of the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. The problem is that these oligarchs, all of them, are related with the system of the pedophilia one.
Did you also catch what he said about the disaster that was supposed to be in 2020 but is now scheduled for 2025? If you haven't seen our podcast on the Deagle Report, which is episode 31, part 3 of the Convergence series, you should watch it, because I have a high degree of confidence in saying that this is going to be part of the many things that happen in the first half of tribulation. But let's look at what's happening right now in front of us. The first of these things I want to show you is that the United Nations, which as we just saw their former executive director saying that they work in line with the World Economic Forum's goals, which is nothing more than a prideful way to say that the World Economic Forum tells them what to do, has just announced that they are meeting to come up with a plan for 7 years of accelerated, transformative action to achieve SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this obviously is not the 7-year treaty between the Antichrist and Israel, but is this what creates that treaty? We can't say for sure, but given what we know about where we are and what has happened up until this point and what is coming, this very well could be. We may be seeing the very meeting that happens coincidentally right after the Feast of Trumpets this year that creates the yet-to-be-signed treaty. My colleague and I were talking about this, and I like the way he puts it. He said, while we don't have the smoking gun evidence that this creates the treaty, we may very well be looking at the gun right before it is fired. So let's take a look at what the UN is saying about this, and then let's take a look at what the Bible says about this yet-to-come treaty. This is the declaration by the UN, and it's short enough and important enough, so I'm just going to read it real quick as it scrolls on your screen. Almost 8 years have passed since the international community agreed to take a bold and transformative steps to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a plan of action to secure the rights and well-being of everyone on a healthy, thriving planet. Today, at the halfway point of 2030, that promise is in peril and a fundamental shift is needed in commitment, solidarity, financing, and action to put the world on a better path, and it is needed now. The recently released Report of the Secretary General on Progress Towards Sustainable Development Goals draws on the latest data to sound the alarm for action. Of roughly 140 targets with data, only about 12% are on track to be achieved by 2030. Close to half, though showing progress, are moderately to severely off track, and some 30% have either seen no movement or regress below the 2015 baseline. Giving up on SDGs or extending the deadline to meet them is not an option. The world has been rocked by a series of interlinked crises: the COVID-19 pandemic, conflict, climate crisis, and a weak global economy. Recommitting to the 2030 Agenda is the best roadmap out of these crises, but we are fast running out of time to correct the course. As a side note, I wonder, why are they running out of time? What's this time limit for this? But let's continue. Even before the events of the past 3 years, trust in public institutions have been declining for decades. Changes in the world of work, globalization, and technological breakthroughs, which raise aspirations but also fears, left many people in precarious positions. There is a narrowing window of opportunity over the next 7 years to redouble our efforts to eliminate poverty and hunger, advance gender equality, and overcome the triple planetary crisis. Failure to heed this call will fuel greater political instability and displacement, further erode trust in public institutions, upend economies, and lead to irreversible existential changes to our natural environment. Above all, it will cause immense suffering for current and future generations, especially among the world's poorest and most vulnerable people and countries. The SDG Summit in September 2023 must signal a genuine turning point. It must mobilize the political commitment and breakthroughs our world desperately needs. It must deliver a rescue plan for the people of the planet. At the center of this rescue plan, heads of state and government must recommit to 7 years of accelerated, sustained, transformative action, both nationally and internationally, to deliver on the promise of SDGs. Leaders can show their resolve by adopting an ambitious and forward-looking political declaration at this SGD Summit and presenting global and national commitments for SDG transformation. Delivering change at the speed and scale required to achieve the SDGs by 2030 will demand that political leaders make bold decisions to match their ambitions. It will require transferring resources from one sector to another, creating new regulatory environments, deploying new technologies, and mobilizing a wide range of actors to advance disruptive change. Doing so can strengthen trust and social cohesion. These efforts must be funneled towards securing dignity, opportunity, and the rights of all while reorienting economies through green and digital transitions and towards resilient trajectories compatible with 1.5 degrees Celsius goal in the Paris Agreement on climate change. And I'm going to skip to the last two important paragraphs here. At the global level, once-in-a-generation commitment is needed to overhaul international finance and economic systems so that it responds to today's challenges, not those of 1940s. It is essentially that countries have the resources needed at scale to invest in both their immediate recovery and long-term sustainable development outcomes, including climate action. It is not too late to turn things around. This generation is equipped with knowledge, technologies, and resources unprecedented in history. Breaking through to a better future for all demands that leaders put this advantage to use to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty, advance gender equity, put our world on low emissions pathway by 2030, and secure human rights for all. Now let's take a look at what the Bible has to say about it. It talks about it in two places. Daniel 9:27 and Isaiah 28:14 and 15. In Daniel we read, "And he will confirm a covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come the one who makes desolate, until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, gushes forth on the one who makes desolate." And in Isaiah, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord, you scoffers who rule this people in Jerusalem. You boast, we have entered into a covenant with death. With the realm of the dead we have made an agreement. When an overwhelming scourge sweeps by, it cannot touch us, for we have made a lie our refuge and a falsehood our hiding place." I want to point out here that I've been hearing some people talk about this, and they are talking in terms of this treaty in the world, and that's not the case. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure all the other nations will be a part of this treaty, but it's only when it is signed by Israel that tribulation begins. Both Daniel and Isaiah are without a doubt talking about the Jewish people. So if this is indeed what the 7-year treaty or covenant or agreement, the Bible actually calls it a covenant. I'm just using the word treaty here because it's easier to understand. But if this is indeed what the treaty comes out of, then it doesn't matter who signs on to it until Israel does, because that is what will start tribulation. But before that can happen, two things must happen first. 1, the Antichrist must come out from behind the curtain, and 2, the rapture must precede the Antichrist. Now, I still do think that Gog-Magog will happen before Israel signs on to whatever comes out of this, but clearly it doesn't have to play out like that. It is entirely possible that Gog-Magog happens just after tribulation starts. My thoughts were that the treaty that starts tribulation would be a treaty that offers safety to Israel after the events of Gog-Magog. But it's looking like that's not the treaty that it's going to be. Now, there are still other reasons that I do think Gog-Magog is right before the start of tribulation, but clearly this does change that dynamic and opens up the possibility that Gog-Magog could be at the beginning of tribulation. That being said, this isn't about that dynamic. This is about the fact that, while I can't say for certain we're looking at the start of this treaty, I can say that it's more likely than not that we are indeed witnessing the start of this treaty. And just to reiterate, the UN is meeting this September 18th through the 19th, and the Feast of Trumpets, while we won't know the exact day or hour of, is projected to be around September 16th or 17th. And as if right on cue, the BRICS alliance, which was formed to and will replace America in the West as the global center of economic and military power, which is currently made up of 5 nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and they are looking to expand by 5 more, bringing their total number to 10. Now, there are 19 other nations that have applied, and I can't find anything official on dates and what they are planning. But if they do move to 10 members this year, what is the significance of that? In Revelation we read, "The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet, but they received authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast." This could be the 10 kings. Now, like I said, I can't find solid information saying that they are for sure just going to admit only 5 more right now. So this isn't the same level of bombshell that the World Economic Forum controlled UN meeting is, but it could turn out to be. We just don't know yet. However, the next thing I want to show you certainly is. If you recall, we are days away from the FedNow coming online. It is supposed to start operations this month. The FedNow is not the coming CBDCs, but it is the payment center for them. It will process the digital transactions, which make CBDCs possible and enables the extreme control measures that they will institute. Now, the original plan that they had put forth was that nations could implement their own version of CBDCs, but that would be controlled by the IMF. Well, either there was a problem with that or they just decided they would simplify their control, because the IMF just announced that they will be the ones providing the world with CBDCs. In their announcement, they state, CBDCs should not be fragmented national propositions. To have more efficient and fairer transactions, we need systems that connect countries. We need interoperability.
The CBDC, or the central bank digital currency, is all set to go global thanks to the International Monetary Fund, which is working on a global platform for CBDC transactions. The IMF wants countries to agree on a common framework for digital currencies for two main reasons here. A common law will help in easy transaction of CBDCs around the world. A global framework will keep a check on unregulated cryptocurrencies. Speaking at a banking conference, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said that CBDCs could help promote financial inclusion across the world. She said, I'm quoting here, if countries develop CBDCs only for domestic deployment, we are underutilizing their capacity. For this reason, IMF is working on the concept of a global CBDC platform.
Cutting through all the legalese here. Basically, the IMF just announced to the world that they will be the ones issuing and controlling the world's digital currency. And even though they make it sound like that it's something that they are going to develop, they already have it. This has already been planned out, and once the FedNow is up and running, it's just a matter of timing. I'm going to play a real quick clip for you from just a couple of days ago. It's a Tom Hughes, Scott Townsend interview, and they make some really good points about this that I want you to hear.
IMF just made a statement that they will not allow national currencies anymore. That's something that's brand new. We got to process that, Tom, the Watchman community, because I think they just dropped a gauntlet that said we are going to control this. And that's a surprise that we saw something that strongly worded today. So I think that it's here, and I have to disclose that I think it's shocking that we see so many of these stage setting and precursor events right now, and yet we're still here. And it just speaks to the love and concern the Lord has to make sure that everyone has an opportunity before his wrath is poured out after the rapture. And I have to say that if anybody in our audience is doubting about the veracity of what they're seeing in the world, if you are confused about what does this all mean, you must pay attention. We are very, very serious when we say that our only hope is Jesus right now. It's not in a political savior. It is not in a government, a philosophy. Wealth won't protect you from these things, because it says that even the rich will be subject to these laws. So absolutely, everyone will be impacted. And it's far better to go through the process of accepting the Lord now and knowing that our future is secure in him. The Holy Spirit is basically a seal of our redemptive, the promise of our redemption. If the rapture happens and you're left behind, then the amount of pressure, Tom, that people will have to go through to fight off, the control mechanisms of the Antichrist system as it's being polished and set up for good, then it's going to be very, very difficult to resist that and to prevail through it.
Yeah. And Satan knows he has to get everybody on the side that he possibly can. Hence, anybody that's not going to be part of the system and willingly go along with it is going to be eliminated. As we read the book of Revelation, we understand exactly how that is going to work. Interesting about the IMF, Scott, I also read where they said this decision of theirs is irreversible. And they said that no nation will be able to have its own digital currency because it won't work if that happens. They know it. And they also presented in the package, hey, this is for your own good. It's for the global. In fact, everybody, if you pay attention to the statements, you'll constantly hear from these organizations, it's for the global common good. The Pope says it, the Rick Warrens of the world say it, and then all these giant corporations and the UNs, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the IMF, they all have the same talking points. It's for the global common good. And
that's why, the noose is tightening, Tom, and the church is sleeping by and large, and people don't care. They're too distracted. They're not paying attention to what's happening, and the threat level continues to go up. And at the right moment, when the Lord decides to allow this next step, it's going to be a devastating blow. I don't think we'll recognize our country when that part of the restraining hand of the Lord is withdrawn and the next steps are taken.
As I stated and showed you at the beginning of this podcast, these events were supposed to have already have happened, but the Lord has intervened and delayed them. They have been delayed until now. In the next part of this, I have even more to show you dealing with AI and quantum computing, and you won't want to miss that. I'll just end this episode by saying, now is the time to get your house in order. Now is the time to remove any stumbling block in your relationship with Jesus if you haven't done so already, because we are truly measuring our time in days, weeks, and possibly months.